Hello, and welcome to the Indigenous Climate Monitoring Toolkit webinar series. Thank you so much for being here today, Chimigwech. My name is Melissa Hamill. I'm from Bridge Building Group and honored to be hosting today's conversation. I'm a member of Kitagan First Nation off reserve and have been working on this project for a few years now. So just thrilled to see the momentum and to see the numbers. Is when we look at who's visiting the website, we know that toolkit has become really useful. And one of the ways, one of the reasons for its existence is to connect folks who are in the Indigenous climate monitoring space from coast to coast to coast. So thank you so much for signing up or for watching the recording. It's really lovely to have you here. I'm calling in today from unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin territory in the Ottawa region. And as I mentioned, we know that you're from all over the place as well. And we will have an interactive moment using Menti in a few minutes to find out where everyone is from. But before we dive in, just a few quick notes about how to interact during today's session, how to kind of like host yourself and be hosted while you're here. So only the hosts and the panelists will be able to see or be heard during the webinar. So we've got a guest speaker here today. We've got members of the ICBCM team and myself and Fernanda from Bridge Building Group. For everyone else, you are kind of behind the curtain, but you should have access to the chat. So for any comments or general discussion, you can please use that chat window and you'll find that chat icon at the bottom of your screen. For any questions during the session, please use the Q&A feature. And it's also, you should see it at the bar at the bottom, or if you are on the Zoom app, it might be a pop-out bar and you should see Q&A there. This is a way for you to participate throughout the session, so you don't have to wait until the Q&A session to put your question or your questions in. Also, it's interactive in that you can vote on somebody else's question that you would like to be asked. We'll get a list of all the questions and I'll be able to see which ones are the popular ones and use that as a way to prioritize our Q&A. We'll address as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. And even though we're not all in the same room together, we hope that it still has that sort of conversational feel to it. The webinar is being run in English, but do feel free to interact and ask questions in the language of your choice. We do have the French version of these housekeeping items being posted into the chat, and we will also post we've got a few questions in our back pocket for Sonny, and if we ask them, we'll post those in French as well. If you do experience any technical difficulties during the session, feel free to message Fernanda directly. You should be able to have that, use the chat tool to be able to direct message, and she will be able to help you out. You can just pick her name from the drop-down menu. Lastly, this session is being recorded, and you'll receive an email in the coming days with a link to the on-demand version. We will also be sure to post it on the Toolkit website. We do have a short survey at the end of the webinar, and that survey is also linked to a draw prize. So everybody who answers the survey will be entered into a draw to win a little prize package that has some cute First Nations, Inuit, and Métis gifts that are locally made. And so be sure to give us your address when you fill in your email addresses when you fill in the survey, and we'll pull a name as a door prize. We're really excited about that. So next, we're just going to move into a quick Menti moment. So asking Fernanda to share a screen that has the QR code, and it usually comes with a little code as well. So you're going to go to menti.com, menti.com. You can do that with your phone by scanning the QR code, or you can open up another tab in your computer and just type menti.com. type in the code 54974895 and we can find out who's calling in from where. So where are you from? And you can see the dots starting to be populated there. That's really exciting. This is great. So we know that there are folks joining from the east, from the north, and we'll just give it a couple more minutes there to populate. This reminds me of one of those maps on the wall that you can put, push pins into. You can see also that the bigger the dot gets, the more people who are from that region. Not surprisingly, a lot of folks from around the Great Lakes. And now we've got West represented as well. Hoping that somebody joins from the eastern provinces, and then we can literally say coast to coast to coast. This is fantastic. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us wherever you are from. We're going to be using Menti a couple more times during the webinar today, and it's great to feel you on the other side of the curtain and to know that you're here and that you're interested in this conversation. In order so that you know who's here who's here in the room, I'd like to introduce Molly, and Molly will introduce our speaker today. Thanks so much, Molly.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you, Melissa. So my name is Molly Morse, and I'm part of the Indigenous community-based climate monitoring program at CIRNAC, or Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada. Bienvenue à tous, je m'appelle Molly Morse. Je travaille au sein du programme de surveillance du climat dans les collectivités autochtones, ici à Relations Couronne Autochtone et Affaires du Nord Canada. I am joining the webinar today from unceded and unsurrendered Algonquin Anishinaabe territory in the Ottawa region. And in the room here, I have my manager, Marlene Doyle, who's going to give a wave, and our co-op student, Amy. We also have my colleague, Lucy, on the line, and she's been working really hard behind the scenes with Bridge Building Group to make this webinar happen. And we have other team members, a few team members across the country. We're a pretty small team. So my program supports First Nations, Métis, and Inuit in across the country with community-led monitoring initiatives. So that means we support projects where folks are looking at climate change itself or the impacts of climate change on the land, the water, animals, wildlife, plants. But besides providing funding, part of our mandate is to support learning and networking opportunities such as this webinar. So for the past 8.5 years or so, I've had the privilege of working with and learning from Indigenous communities and organizations. More specifically, I'm the program lead for communities in Ontario and Quebec. And in 2021, we started funding a project with Four Rivers Environmental Services Group. And Four Rivers provides support and technical services to Matawa member First Nations communities in Northern Ontario. And over the past couple of years, I've had the pleasure of getting to know Sonny Black, who is our guest speaker today, who is the project manager of technology, all things technology, at Four Rivers. And he's been helping Matawa communities with setting up this weather station network over the last few years. And Sonny also has about 5 years of experience in the aerial imaging industry, as well as over 20 years of experience with photography and videography and audio, which is kind of neat. And Sonny's very knowledgeable and passionate about his work, and I think that's going to shine through in his presentation today. So, he's going to be sharing valuable experience on what it was like to work on this project, which is ongoing. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Sonny Black. And I turn it over, and we have a question.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Molly. As you all heard, I am Sonny Black. I am working with 9 First Nation communities that are members of Matawa. So as Molly mentioned, Four Rivers is the environmental services group, and we do many, many different things. I deal with a lot of technology related items, and mostly the weather stations. They've kind of become this huge project, and for many different reasons. I'll get into that in a little bit with my presentation here. And as it was mentioned, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them at any time. So I'll just make a little adjustment here on my screens, and I will start sharing my presentation. So I am going to go about this a little bit differently than a lot of webinar presentations. This is a story map, and this is also available on the Toolkit webpage. So if anybody wants to follow along, feel free to hop over there, and it is listed on the link. So Matawa Community Weather Stations are experiences with self-hosted weather monitoring equipment. So why did our communities need weather stations? So one of the big challenges, I'm sure, as we have people from coast to coast, you've noticed there's not great coverage in a lot of remote areas. And that becomes really important when we start seeing climate changes, extreme weather, weather pattern shifts. So by having our own weather stations, we're able to get climate conditions that are very, very, very localized. And that's important for a ton of reasons. It's hard to rely on data from weather stations that are available because a lot of the times they're hundreds of kilometers away. And I'm sure everybody has noticed when you're on a longer road trip, it could be perfectly beautiful, sunny where you are, and 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, it's pouring rain and just a terrible storm. So that localized information is very, very important. And with our weather stations, they are actually research grade stations. So the measurements they take are very accurate. That does pose some challenges, which I'll get into a little bit later in my story here. So the equipment that we picked the Hobo RX 300. That's actually the data logger that is basically the brain of the station. And one of the reasons we picked this particular model is because it's very customizable, and you can add sensors in the future. You can modify it how it suits your needs. So we were able to choose the sensors that were most important for us. The challenge with that is because it is a survey grade station, it's not that intuitive to operate. So the setup and configuration is a little bit more difficult and kind of a specialized skill. Much like with a lot of survey grade equipment that I'm sure a lot of us have used on this call, it's kind of hard to read the manual sometimes too, because they come outdated and everything else. So it's a bit of a learning process. But once we had them set up, they were great. They worked really, really good. One of the benefits to these stations as well, it's also a drawback, they're Wi-Fi connected. So they log every 5 minutes. So they capture all of the sensors that are installed every 5 minutes. It stores that locally, and then every 30 minutes, it connects to a cloud service and broadcasts that out to the cloud service. So we can go in every 5 minutes and see real-time weather. And that's really, really interesting. So I kind of explained this already, but this shows a few of the components. These are some of the sensors that we do actually have deployed. Right here is the weather direction, weather speed. I believe this might be a hygrometer, so that would measure humidity. And believe this might be a temperature sensor, or that might be a not sure exactly which sensor that is. We don't have that particular one. They are solar powered with a battery installed inside the weatherproof case here. So on those nice sunny days, it charges up the battery. That's more than enough to run it for overnight or a few days. So our particular stations, as I mentioned, are very modular, but we're measuring wind speed, wind direction, which also captures gust speeds, rainfall amounts, which unfortunately is only rain, not all precipitation, temperature, humidity, solar radiation, and evapotranspiration. Um, Evapotranspiration is actually a calculated, but it uses the relative humidity. I believe it uses the solar radiation and wind and a few different parameters to calculate that for us. So the cloud service that we have, unfortunately, it does require subscription, but what that allows us to do is connect remotely to that station so we don't actually have to have a site visit every time we want to pull data from it. So that's really, really nice. And being a cloud service, of course, it's backed up by the cloud provider, but we also download it once a month and compile it. And we store that in a few different places just so it's safe. We're looking for real long-term monitoring here. So it's a bit of a process in that way. So moving on, as I mentioned, we do get real-time data off of our stations. So we actually have a few different ways of viewing that. But one of the ways that we can see that is a dashboard that we can choose to have public, private, or password protected, however we want to share that data, which was also really important to us in our communities. We also have, we call it a GeoHub. Some people on the call might be familiar with GeoHubs. It's kind of a ubiquitous term these days in our world, but it's basically just a spot for information. So this is somewhere that we can put any information that we want to share with our communities in a secure way. So we have some dashboards on there. We have some graphs, and we also can provide all of the raw data. And that's pretty immense data. So with our stations, I mentioned all the parameters that they kind of monitor. At the end of the year, for a full year of logging, as long as there's no dropouts, which we have rarely seen, we're looking at about 100,000 lines of data. And each one of those lines has all of those parameters on it. So for one station, we're looking at over 700,000 data points per station. It's a lot of data to process and a lot of things to go through, but having all that data, it will allow us to make some real important decisions in the future. And if you go to our story map here, there is actually a link to our GeoHub if you'd like to look at the public facing. So as I mentioned, our stations do rely on a Wi-Fi connection. That's also a negative in some aspects because it does limit where we could put the stations. We had to choose areas within community that had a Wi-Fi connection. So that's kind of changed now. There are stations available now that connect through satellite. We have other options that we could have explored now, like Starlink. There's some pretty cost-effective packages that you can get that would allow for that connection. The big benefit to that, as I've mentioned, is we can connect to that station as long as it maintains that Wi-Fi connection and make changes to it, reboot it if there's any issues in logging, make sure it's logging, and we can monitor it really effectively from a remote area. The drawback to that, having to have that connection, is we couldn't put them in a very important spot for our communities. It's still very important to collect that data within community as well, but there are times you want them really out in the middle of nowhere and collect that information that just isn't being collected. So, as I said, there's many stations on the market now that are kind of solve some of the issues. So some of the challenges that we've encountered, as I mentioned, they're not extremely straightforward to set up. It's a large tripod that you mount all the equipment on. There's a whole bunch of cables. There's different components inside that weatherproof case. And if everything's not connected just the right way, they get very unhappy. Um, that's also a negative in the sense that there's a lot of different sensors that are interconnected. And if one fails, that could mean bad things for the whole station. So one of the things too that we noticed with one station in particular, it has a really hard time with the internet connection that's available. Our remote communities, unfortunately, don't have a reliable high-speed internet connection. A lot of times there's dropouts and things like that, and that really affects the usability of these stations in particular. It's a challenge for sure. So the good thing, successes. So out of the 5 stations that we have, 4 of those stations have never really seen any issues. They've operated reliably over the past number of years. I had the first one we had online was in 2022, and that station has been 100% reliable. We had one small issue with it, and that was because the solar panel got covered in snow. So all it took was a little brush off and everything was good again. And we knew about it right away because having these internet connected, it gave us an alert, a warning, everything was good. So that kind of complexity makes it a little bit difficult. If you don't have that stable connection, a lot of the benefits to these stations aren't realized. So that's where the newer stations that may have satellite really shine through. So benefits beyond just the weather, directly related to the weather. Some of you might have heard there was a blastomyces outbreak in Constance Lake First Nation. Four Rivers and Matawa kind of led a sampling run. And one of the things that really becomes difficult is you can't find the stuff in the environment. It's never seen. So we used the weather station's data to kind of pinpoint the ideal time for the growth of this fungus, the spores, so we could sample and hopefully find it. So we also have, if you're inclined to go look at this story map, we do have a climate monitoring survey. So if you'd like to click, you can fill out some information for your communities. And you can also choose if you want that publicly shared or not. And that's all I have for now.
There we go. Thank you so much, Sonny. And thanks for the demonstration as we go to just noting there was a question in the chat just about sharing the slides. So we did share the link to your presentation directly too. Everyone can access that by just clicking on the link that Fernanda shared. While we get some questions set up here, I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen on the Toolkit website so that everyone knows. I think most people that are joining us should be familiar with the Toolkit by now. But we wanted to make sure that you know that if you go here to indigenousclimatemonitoring.ca and you click on stories, that yours is the first one listed here. So really easy to find. Click here. So we've got the background that was shared generously by Sunny. We've got the link to the story map as well that we just went through, and then links to the different resources that Sunny spoke about. So that's all on the Toolkit website. And we will add this recording to that page as well as another resource that you can use. So I'll stop sharing my screen. I know that Fernanda also posted that link into the chat. And I'm just going to open my Q&A box here. So we've got a question from a webinar participant, Adita, who says, does it have a version where the data is stored locally for a longer time and downloaded manually? Most of our territory doesn't have Wi-Fi or network.
That's a great question. So these stations will store data for 6 months. I don't believe the new models have a larger data capacity, but in that case, I would probably look at some of the different stations that do have satellite connectivity. I'm sure there are stations out there with a larger data storage as well. Um, but for these in particular, 6 months is the limit, unfortunately.
Yeah, thanks for that. Often when we are on these calls, that theme of rural and remote access comes up, and it's one of those recommendations that anytime we're in a room with government, it's like, yes, make this a priority because especially when you're dealing with this highly technical equipment, this is such an important issue.
That's a
Um,
question we get asked a lot because that was one of our difficulties as well. We don't have reliable internet everywhere, and having, Starlink as an option is an option, but that's also an increased cost too, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, thanks for that. So just process-wise, anybody who is on the call and wants to add a question to the Q&A, you can just click that Q&A button. We've got Patrick Freeland that has come on and starts off by asking, "It's all good. How are you?" in his language. My name is Patrick Freeland from Muskogee First Nation, and he serves as the Senior Tribal Climate Liaison with the Affiliated Tribes of Northwest Indians and currently resides on Leshtemish territory in Bellingham, Washington. Um, Question is, as data sovereignty, Indigenous data sovereignty in particular, are incredibly important as LLM and web scraping become more prevalent, what have you been using for security? Have there been community conversations about Indigenous data or data usage?
So data sovereignty absolutely is our highest importance with everything we do with Four Rivers and Matawa in general. So as far as a station itself, they're installed out of reach. They would be in theory accessible, so you could get to them with, say, a ladder or something, but they're not easily accessible. You can't just walk by and open up the box. You do need special software to download the data from them. So you couldn't just plug in, say, like a hard drive or something and take it off there. So the cloud service is secured. Of course, there is a small risk there as anything cloud-based, but the company that hosts it is very versed in cybersecurity, so it's as secure as a cloud service can be. Once it comes off the cloud service, we store it locally, which is very highly secured. So that's a great question. As far as data usage, that is decided upon as a community by community basis. The communities own all of the data that we store for them, so it's really individualized as far as what they want to do with the data.
Great, thanks for that. We've got another question that's popped up that says, given your experience with this project work to date, looking back now, would there be anything else that you would do different in terms of equipment or processes? And what are your hindsight thoughts and considerations?
Great question. Hindsight's always 2020, they say. So one of the challenges we had was when we purchased these, the choices for survey grade monitoring, um, they're pretty limited. A lot of them were the kind of similar to this. So looking back, I'm not sure we could have chosen different equipment for the results we wanted. Um, they were difficult, complex, but that kind of ties in again to what we were looking for. Looking back now, if we could have the equipment that's available now back then, we definitely would have made some different choices. There was also talk of when we purchased these stations that there was a module you could add for satellite connectivity. So that kind of did add to us choosing those stations in particular. Um, as far as location wise, I'm not sure we would do it much different. The first station we installed was actually on ground level, and that was actually lightly vandalized. There were some cables that were cut on it. I'm not sure what the reasoning behind that was, but it happens. So we chose to install them on elevated platforms after that. So it's kind of one of those things you look back at small difficulties and you just adjust and adapt. But overall, they've been really reliable. So I think we made the right choice in equipment for what we had available.
At the time, we were kind of chatting about that before folks joined us as well. It's always in hindsight easy to look back, especially in this time where IT is, going so fast. I'm sure everything will be, AI integrated before we know it, if it isn't already. But for it sounds like for what you had, it was what it was meant to be. Yeah,
Exactly.
good. Back to data, just a follow-up question. Are you working towards a more long-term archiving initiative for the data?
So a long-term archive, we're kind of working towards that. So as we build data, it's kind of related, but to do any kind of real important, you know, weather predictions or anything like that, you need to have at least 10 years of data. So that's technically what we're doing right now is a long-term archive. Thankfully, the data from these weather stations, although there's a vast, really long spreadsheet that it spits out, as far as file size wise, they're fairly small. So it's not too challenging to be able to have a long-term archive source. As far as longevity of the data, that's a bit of a different route, and that's kind of where our GeoHub comes in. So it's provided by Esri, and I don't foresee Esri going anywhere anytime soon. So that's kind of a long-term plan to be able to have that data accessible. And it's kind of accessible by everybody in our organization too. So let's say for whatever reason, I'm not around anymore, I can hand that data off to anybody else.
Great. Um, what types of decisions can communities support or inform using the data collected from the weather stations?
So I guess the biggest decisions would be adaptation, right? You can go back and look and see how things were, the trends, and that would really help to formulate adaptation strategies. And that, I mean, that I can go about a long time because that touches so many aspects, right? From food security to, insulation in homes to heating and cooling. So there's a ton of different things you can answer with that data.
Yeah, each of those is a webinar in itself.
Exactly.
Thanks for that. Going back to the Q&As that are popping up, and thanks to everybody for interacting in this way with the technology that we do have. Somebody who missed the presentation itself, but just to let you know, whoever you were, we will have this whole recording up on the Toolkit website as well, so you'll be able to rewatch. But they are curious to know what the process is like starting afresh to establish an Indigenous climate monitoring and how different is it from Western science, climate, or weather monitoring? In there, I'm also reading into that, we often talk about two-eyed seeing. So it's like, how is this different from just your typical weather station?
So I guess that's a bit of a difficult question to answer. I guess the best way I could answer that is we have a lot of community conversations where I remember when the weather was like this, or, we never have snow this deep, or we have less snow. So it's a good way to really back those stories up, right? As far as how easy it is to start a weather monitoring program like this, in my experience, it's fairly difficult. There's a lot of moving pieces, and especially when you have remote communities, it's difficult, as a lot of things we do. But when you have the support of a fantastic team like we have with Molly's team, it makes it so much easier.
Yeah, any advice that you would give to, like, direct advice to a community that's considering installing its first weather station? So you've said it's a lot of work, it's hard work, it requires the funding, the backing of the community as well as partnerships. But just that advice for the community that's like ready to press go on making this happen.
I would say the first thing, really be sure on what you want to monitor, what's important to you. Once you have that answered, spend quite a bit of time looking at different equipment. In my experience, that can be very aggravating because as soon as you contact XYZ company about their fantastic product, you hear from them daily for months on end. But it's kind of a necessary evil having options. And if possible, reach out to us, reach out to other communities that you know have a weather monitoring program, see what equipment they're using, any difficulties they've had with it, challenges, the benefits, the drawbacks they've seen. I've found with my conversations that I've had with other communities, it's kind of a resounding thing that we all seem to have the same difficulties. So I think networking is the most important. Look at different equipment, even if you're really stuck on this unit because it has a specific feature that you really want, make sure you look at other stuff too, because there's so many choices out there now that are easy to set up and maintain and everything else. So
That's great. And maybe I'll just take this quick moment before getting to a couple more questions just to share my screen one more time because that networking piece is a great plug for the map of projects that is on the toolkit itself. So for those of you who joined late, this is the Indigenous Monitoring toolkit that this whole project is built around. And the map is really excellent. It lists projects from coast to coast to coast, and you can use this area over here to choose whether it's a First Nation, Inuit, Métis, or other Indigenous organization project. You can specifically look up weather monitoring projects. You can look up a specific geographic area, and any of these dots that you click on will also show you contact information for the project if we have it. So there's one without the contact information, but if we click on different dots, you'll find as much program you'll find the start year of the project, more details about it, and then often contact information as well. So just a reminder that that's a great tool on the tool, a great piece of the toolkit as well. So back to our questions, there's one here about costs. So if you're able to share, what kinds of costs are you experiencing related to O&M for weather stations? In other words, if a nation or organization was starting out, what could they expect to set up a system and the yearly cost to maintain?
so for our particular stations, I really plugged that cloud-based aspect of it. There is a subscription that's associated with that, and that's unfortunately an American company. So the cost changes with the exchange rate. The last time I renewed one of our stations, it was about $270 per year. But they also have different levels of cloud service. So there are more inexpensive subscriptions. There's also more expensive. So that's kind of the middle of the road as far as a monthly cost per station. And it's $270 per year, I should say. The purchase price going back to 2021, I believe our stations were under $8,000 a piece, slightly under. I imagine that's probably greatly increased now, just with the cost of everything. It seems like a lot of things have doubled or, more than that. So, for a single station, I would probably, if you were looking at trying to secure funding for them, I'd try and build in a few years of subscription on top because funding's always difficult to find. And at least then you know that you're secured for a few years.
That's great. Thanks for that level of detail. And I'm sure that it ranges depending on when your project started and how the technology advances as well. So again, the more opportunities to network and share that information openly with each other is really fantastic. And glad to see some connections happening here in the chat and also in the questions. I've got a one-liner question and then a big one, another big one from Patrick. So is your data currently feeding provincial, national climate models? Is one from an anonymous attendee.
So currently, no. We're not feeding that data to anywhere but our communities.
Hmm.
Uh, and the reason for that is data sovereignty. So we we hold the data for our communities, and that's as far as it goes. If you were looking at starting a program to try and feed those provincial or federal models, I would look into those first because there's very, very specific installation requirements and data requirements when you're going to feed those models. They're definitely achievable. Our stations would kind of line up with that. I believe our installation height is not acceptable for them. So there are some aspects you have to take in mind when if you're looking to feed those models.
Yeah, thanks for that. And you've got solidarity happening in the chat for that answer. One of those is from Patrick, who asks, large climate models like big data, LiDAR, satellite, topography, soil, vegetation, etc., often aren't harmonized or don't reference local monitoring. Downscaling can be difficult and often take high performance computing to ground truth historic data that is incongruent with local sensing. Have you been able to have you been exploring how these data can make climate adaptation able to create highly granular and localized areas for specific climate adaptation projects? Commercial partners may be able to do this, but the cost can be both prohibitive and exclusionary. Public research may be a good partner, however, it has its own caveats. Could you share what the big ideas may be and how you have found or hope to find partnership who value tribal sovereignty and reciprocity? It's a big one.
That is a big one, so I apologize if I don't answer all of it. I guess as far as finding a partnership, we do have some climate partnerships with Dr. David Pearson. Not for our weather data per se, but we do have a good relationship with his whole organization. So um, we have done some work with the Pika GeoHub as well, and there is potential to maybe tie in with some of their modeling. Um, but as far as us doing any climate modeling at this time, we just don't have the amount of data to do that yet. So
Yeah, thanks for that. And that sounds like a whole cup of tea that could be had just on that subject. So
absolutely.
again, invitations to connect. There's another invitation to connect in the both the chat and now in the Q&A as well, asking whether it's possible to start discussions on having weather stations available on SICU. And there's a link to the Indigenous Knowledge app SICU. I'm wondering if your community has thought of that at all.
I've never heard it brought up, but we're always happy to have conversations. So I'd encourage you to reach out directly to me through my email. I believe that's listed on the story page.
Excellent. Thanks. I don't see any more questions, but let's keep you on the line because I want to offer to audience members just another way to interact, and we'll do another Menti. And Fernanda will share her screen, and we'll go to the second Menti question, which is I think it's about weather stations in your community. So, does your Indigenous community or organization currently operate one or more weather stations? So, we've got at least three people on the call who are yeses. One who says we have weather stations, but they are currently not operational. Two say not yet, but we are interested. Two say no, and four not applicable. So not responding on behalf of an Indigenous community or organization that is aligned with those projects. And you can see those numbers all ticking up. and really interesting to know that there are a number of communities and organizations online that do have climate monitoring stations or weather stations in their community. I think we've had 18 of 31 people reply. If you do want to head over to menti.com and put the code in or use your QR code, you can answer this question as well as the last one that we have, which is an invitation to share insights from today. So, what is one idea, lesson, or practice that you are taking away from today's session? And again, feel free to share your answer in your language of choice. And you should be able just to click the arrow button to your last question to answer this as a community of webinar participants. While we leave that up on the screen, I'm just going to take a quick moment to look through the chat. Thank you for being so involved in both the chat and in the Q&A. This has been really excellent. Just noting a comment from Graham that I missed as we were having our conversation that just said there are actually quite a lot of remote weather and water monitoring stations maintained and run by Ontario. This includes all remote First Nations at the airports. And thanks, Graham, for also adding that GeoHub link for folks to be able to explore that way. And then a comment from Lucy, just as that reminder that for the map that I shared my screen on to show the toolkit, the ICBCM program and is always looking for more projects to add to that site. So it's not a static map. We're always auditing it to make sure that the information is up to date. And if you have a project that is not on there already, we'd be more than happy to help to add it. We are also always looking for new stories for the toolkit, for the website. So that's really the most exciting part of this toolkit is that you can go to stories and see projects and success stories that are happening coast to coast to coast. If you click on any of them, for many of them, there's also videos and resources that show you the step-by-step how-to for communities who are just starting these projects. So if your community starts up a project and wants to share your story on the Toolkit website, you can contact myself or Fernanda as well as Molly or Lucy from the ICBCM team. So let's go to these ideas, lessons, practices, takeaways. I know everyone can read them, but how cost-effective it can be to run a weather station, establishing a weather station as part of our community-based monitoring program, the map of the Indigenous climate monitoring projects, and noting that on that map, there are projects funded by the ICBCM program and others that aren't. So it's really neat to be able to just see the variety and the diversity of projects all the way across the country. Making sure to find the best equipment if you're looking into this. Connecting and learning from others as a step to starting large projects. A sense of costs and considerations when establishing a weather station. So thanks for going into that detail, Sonny. That transparency is really appreciated by the audience, it sounds like. Research is important prior to purchasing new technology, as is planning ahead for subscription funds, knowing what your monitoring questions are before you begin. The practical application is inspiring. It gives me hope and also inspires ideas for intertribal connections to advance climate adaptation with Indigenous data sovereignty as a foundation. Awesome. And then at the bottom here, we've got always the idea of building relationships, recognizing that tribes in the US and First Nations in Canada are connected. Geopolitical boundaries are not our way. So that reminder about borders, that this is, we see a lot of dots because it's a quote unquote Canadian toolkit. But how great would it be to see those spread out over the borders as well? So thanks for that comment too. Maybe I'll open it up to you, Sonny. Is there anything on our collaboration of answers on the Menti that sticks out to you or inspires you?
All of it does,
Mm.
honestly. Um, I love being able to talk with all communities, different experiences. We can learn from each other so much. And the comment about borders not being our way, that one hits home.
Yeah.
Working together is the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're hoping that the toolkit helps make that happen. So for everyone on the call, feel free also to share the link to the toolkit with your communities, with anyone who you think would be interested in Indigenous climate monitoring. Just going back to the Menti, I think we've got one more that I didn't read out: increase collaboration and two-eyed seeing within federal and provincial weather and climate monitoring organizations to help support projects, reduce duplication of effort, and increase stewardship. So, yeah, we agree with you 100% on that. Thank you, everybody, for sharing. And the Menti is not closed. So, feel free to continue to add to this, and we'll be sure to post it when we post this recording onto the toolkit as well. I don't see any more questions in the Q&A, so I think that we're probably good to start wrapping up. I want to say a really big chimigwech to you, Sonny, for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to work with you in prepping for the call today, and just really inspiring work that you're doing. So thanks for being so open with the conversation and the Q&A.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a
Yeah,
pleasure.
yeah, you're welcome. Um, as far as next steps and closing go, a reminder about the evaluation. So we'll put that evaluation link in the chat. We'll also send it out in an email after the call, so that you can share not only how this website was experienced for you, or this webinar was experienced for you, but also um, feel free to share ideas for which webinars you would like to see next. We'll be running a couple more of them for sure, and we would love to respond to your ideas for what you would like to hear on this topic of climate monitoring. A reminder that when you fill out that evaluation, your name, if you leave us your email address, your name will be put into a draw, and we will send out a little package of Indigenous made gifts to your home. And thank you, Fernanda, for sharing the links to all of that, both in the chat and in on the slide. Um, Other ways to get involved, we also put a link in the chat to be able to sign up for the ICBCM newsletter if you don't already get it. You'll be receiving regular information and inspirational stories from this space. And looking forward to our next webinar. So we will be posting a date and a theme for that in the newsletter itself, and we'll be sure to post as soon as we have that information. So really deep gratitude to all of you for spending this hour with us, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you so, so much. Take care. Bye-bye.